Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be adding one more major mechanic to our game. Last time we added our thirst slider, which you can see right now is degrading, and I'm getting more and more thirsty with each passing moment. So what we're adding in is a way to drink and refill this thirst slider. I could drink this bottle of water and restore a little, or I could drink from this big, well, let's call it a jug, and gain even more. So it may seem like a small thing, but it's going to require quite a bit of code. So let's jump in and get started, and I'll do my best to keep this as concise and straightforward as possible. Jumping into my scripts folder, as always, Control-click, Create, C# script. Now I want you to follow my naming process precisely, because if you don't, you're going to need to pay extra careful attention during the scripts, because we use these names in the scripting. So if you don't copy the title of this script exactly, but when we're writing the code, you write exactly what I typed instead of your script name, then it's going to break your code and things aren't going to work. So if you always type everything exactly as I do, you'll be fine. If you do change your script names, you're just going to have to identify where in the code we're referencing those scripts so that you can change what I'm typing to match the name of your script. So this script is going to help our character, or the player, interact with objects in the game world. So I'm going to title this Player Interact, all one word, no spaces, with a capital P for player and a capital I for interact. I'll hit enter to finish that and double click it to open it and start editing it in MonoDevelop. So the first thing you need to change here is way up at the top, but just below using Unity Engine. We'll hit enter and make a new line, and we are going to do a using Unity Engine and then add .ui and finish with a semicolon, because we will be using this to reference our UI and change some things on our screen. Now we are going to use a void update. We don't need anything in void start, so I'm going to start here by just deleting everything above void update up into the public class. And then I'll hit return a few times to give myself some room to work. So now it's time to set up some variables. I'll try to talk through these quickly as I make them so that they make a little bit of sense. We're starting with private game object, raycasted object. And in raycasted object, this is abbreviated to capital OBJ at the end. When we talk about raycast, what we're doing is we're shooting an invisible ray out from a certain point. In this case, it's going to be from our player character. And this ray can do things like detect what's in front of us, or help us select an object, or destroy an object, or identify an object. There's a lot that you can do with raycasting. Next, we need a private float, which we will call ray length, with a capital L for length. And we'll make this equal to 10. Now you could change this number. This is basically just determining how far the ray is going to be cast out in front of the player. So if you wanted the player to be able to reach something really far away with a ray, or say you were shooting something and using this ray to track where it goes, then you would want this to be much further. But since we want this just to be something that's like within the player's reach, like they can pick up a bottle of water, a short distance like 10 will do fine for now. Next, I'm going to make a little space because we're switching out of the private variables and into public variables. So I'm just going to split them up like that and start with a public layer mask, and then space new layer mask. Now, a layer mask, this will help our ray only touch certain things. So if we want the ray to tell us what it's touching, this layer mask will help us make sure that it will tell us, say, a bottle of water that we can drink, or a piece of food that we can eat. But it will prevent it from identifying tree, grass, ground, sky, everything that it touches. It could get a little overwhelming. This will help us narrow it down. Our next public variable is going to be called player vitals, and then space player vitals, this time with the lowercase p for player, but still a capital V for vitals. Now, this one here, quick pay attention. This is going to be referencing the script that you wrote last time. So if your script that controls your thirst slider wasn't named player vitals, if you named it thirst slider or something different like that, you're going to want to change this blue text to match the name of the script that you created in last week's video, the one that I named player vitals. Just a couple more public variables. We need a public image for a crosshair. Most of you probably know what a crosshair is, but think like when you're aiming down sights. But think when you're aiming in a game, Or even in a lot of adventure games, just looking around, there's a little dot or a little cross in the middle of the screen to let you know precisely where the player is looking or aiming or something like that. So we're going to be adding a crosshair, and we're going to need to reference it with this public variable. One more public variable. This one will be text, and we're going to call this item name text, and end all of these in a semicolon. This is just going to help us use the raycast to pop up on screen what we're looking at. So if we're looking at a bottle of water, it can say bottled water. If we're looking at something else, it can tell us what that object is. Now we can go down inside of our update function. So we've created the variables that we need for a raycast, but now it's time to actually cast the ray. So here's how we do it. We'll start with raycast hit, all one word with a capital R and capital H, and then space hit, all lowercase, end in a semicolon, and go down to our next line. Next, we're doing a vector 3, which you might remember from last year. A vector 3 is just talking about a point in three-dimensional space. So our vector 3 is doing something with our X, Y, and Z positions. And this one we will be casting forward, so we use the abbreviation FWD, and then equals transform direction. Now inside of parentheses, and I'm going to add my ending semicolon a little early, I'm going to go back inside my parentheses and add in vector 3 forward. Dot forward, actually. Vector 3 dot forward. So we'll simply be casting our ray forward from wherever this script is attached, and we will be attaching this to our player controller. Let's go down a few lines, and we're going to start an if statement. So, obviously we start with the word if, and then I need a set of parentheses, inside of which I will start with physics.raycast. From here I create another set of parentheses, and inside of this new set, I will add transform.position, comma, forward, abbreviated to FWD, comma, out, space hit, comma, ray length with a lowercase r and a capital L, comma, new, and you can see it's auto-completing down here for me, hopefully it is for you, new layer mask with a capital L and a capital M. To finish this off, we just add dot value, and we aren't ending this in a semicolon because this is an if statement, so it's going to contain some information, so we need to create an opening curly bracket, make a little space, and a closing curly bracket. And whether you leave that curly bracket up here, or a lot of times I like to push these down to keep things organized. So here's my container for if our raycast is casting forward, we're casting a ray forward from our player. And if it hits something that's within the length that we set and on the layer mask that we've set up, then it's going to do something. We still have one more parameter. So inside of this if, we actually have another if real quick. Because next we're going to check if it's hitting the right type of item. So we will say if, and then parentheses. Inside of these parentheses, if hit.collider.compare tag with a capital C and T, new set of parentheses, and inside of these parentheses, quotations. Inside of these quotations, we're going to type the word consumable. And make sure that you spell it exactly as I do here, because this is something that we're going to be typing later on as a tag for our game objects that we want to be able to click on and consume, like a bottle of water. Once again, we're not ending in a semicolon because we are creating an open and closing curly bracket. I'll do my usual habit of bumping this down, keeping things organized. If our ray has cast and hit something that is consumable, then we are going to do a few things, and some of these are going to pop up in red right now until we finish our script. They aren't going to be sure what we're talking about. So we're just going to go in order from the top of the script to the bottom, and by the time it's all done, there should be no errors, and all the lines that we're typing right now will understand what they need to do. But right now, they're going to be a little confused. So right now, as you type, some things are going to pop up in red. Don't worry about that. Don't freak out and go look for the problem until you finish the whole script, and then if you still see red, you can go back and try to figure out what you might have missed. So if we've met all these parameters, we will set crosshair to active, which is a function that we have not created yet, so it's red. We're going to make that later. Don't worry about it. We are also going to set raycasted object equals hit.collider.crosshair. game object, and then a semicolon. Next line, item name text dot text will be equal to raycasted object, or OBJ. Always remember this is abbreviated. Raycasted OBJ dot get component. Now here, after get component, we create a pair of angle brackets, inside of which we are going to be typing the word item. Now, item doesn't really mean anything to this code yet because it's referencing a script that we haven't written yet. After we write that script, this word will turn blue because it will know what we're referencing. But right now, it's going to be a little bit confused about what we're doing here. After this, just a quick open and close parentheses, and then dot item name with a capital N. And that in a semicolon. These things are in the red because it's referencing a script that we haven't written yet. Don't freak out, it'll be fixed soon. Now, inside of this if statement, we need one more if statement. So if, in this if, inside of its parentheses, we will put input dot get mouse button down. So when we click with our mouse button, and we need to tell it which one, so we will put 0. So this is when we left click. When we left click with our mouse button, what's going to happen? If our ray is casted on a specific object, like a bottle of water, and we decide to click on that object, we will simply put raycasted obj dot get component, once again angled brackets, and then we will reference this script that we're about to write called item. Then a quick open and close parentheses, dot player interaction, once again open and close parentheses, and end in a semicolon. Again, the red is because it's referencing part of a script that we don't have yet, so worry not, it'll be fixed soon. Alright, we have a little more to do, but the good news is, the hard part is over. All the code from here gets a little bit simpler. The one thing we still need to be careful about is where we write this code, because you can see with all of these if statements opening up, we have a lot of closing curly brackets here. And we want to make sure that we write our next piece of code in the right spot. So we need to go down past 3 curly brackets. We need to go outside of this if statement, and this if, and outside of this if. So I'm selecting the 3rd curly bracket after I finish this last if statement. You can see it's highlighting the curly bracket right below the first if statement, and I'm going to hit enter a couple times to give myself some room. And now I'm writing a quick else statement. So if all of these things line up, then something happens. But what about when we're casting our ray and those things aren't lining up? There's no object in range, or the objects in range don't have the right tag. What do we do then? So we write an else statement, and inside of this else statement, one thing I want to do is set my crosshair to be normal. You can see it's trying to help me autocomplete, but it's actually kind of misdirecting me, so be careful. There will be times when you don't necessarily want to follow this. So I'm typing crosshair specifically with a capital C and no other capitals in it, and then adding to it capital N normal, all one word, open and close a pair of parentheses, and add a semicolon. This is referencing another function that we're about to make. So we've already told it that when we hover on an object, it should tell us the name of that object. But what about when we're not hovering on that object? What should that text do? Well, we're just going to turn the text off so that we don't see anything at all. So we'll put an item name text with a lowercase I and a capital N and T, and then dot text, and this will be equal to null. Null always just means that something has been turned off. It's not there. It's null. End it in a semicolon, and our else statement is done. Now we're going to get rid of most of this red stuff up here by going outside of our else statement and outside of our update function, and this is where we're going to create the crosshair normal function and the crosshair active function. Let's start with crosshair active. So to create a new function, we always start with a void space crosshair active, capital C for cross, capital A for active, all one word, add a couple of parentheses, and as always when creating a function, we will create a couple of curly brackets to contain everything that we are doing inside of this function. So inside of crosshair active, meaning when we're looking at something that we can interact with, we are going to set the crosshair.color to be equal to the color.red. End in a semicolon, and now whatever we're using for our crosshair, we're going to make this a little white dot in just a second. So it'll be a white dot until we look at something, and then this line of code will make that dot glow red. That's just a tip to the player that they can interact with the thing that they're looking at. Now let's go outside of the curly brackets for our crosshair active. Hit enter a couple times to make some space. Writing our last function, void crosshair with a capital C, all one word normal with a capital N, open and close parentheses, go down and create your curly brackets to contain this line of code, and we will write crosshair, all one word with a capital H, dot color, and it will simply be equal to color with a capital C, dot white. Now I noticed that my crosshair normal here was staying red, so I went up and clicked on run and then start debugging, just to help me find exactly what was wrong, though I had a pretty good idea. So it says crosshair normal does not exist in current context, but I made the crosshair normal function down here, so what's wrong? Well, if you look closely, I had a typo. I typed corsair. I switched up my R and my O. So these little mistakes can happen to anyone, and they will almost certainly happen to you somewhere along the way. Now that I fixed that, I'm going to go run and start debugging again, and that problem is fixed. Now, it still has a problem here because we're referencing a script that doesn't exist yet, and it's not too happy about that. All the same, I'm going to make sure that this is saved, and I'm going to go back to Unity, and we will pick up on that next and final script in the next video. See you soon.